I believe that Caitlin Clark signed on with Nike, and I had a feeling that when Nike signed her, they were like, oh, full steam ahead. We're going to market the shit out of Caitlin Clark, yada, yada, yada. And then I believe these comments happened from what was, at the time, their biggest marketable women's basketball.
Look at that frustration. That's not casual commentary. That's someone who's been watching the biggest marketing opportunity in women's sports get buried for 18 months. And now we know why. Because on Wednesday, the federal government filed an enforcement action against Nike for systemic race discrimination against white employees. The timing of this investigation reveals something a lot of us have been suspecting since Caitlin Clark signed that deal.
Remember right before Caitlin Clark came into the league? All right, she gave an interview talking about A'ja Wilson with the AP in 2024, and she was talking about race and marketability. Quote, I think it's a huge thing. I think a lot of people say it's not about black and white, but to me, it is. It really is, but because you can be top-notch at what you are as a black woman, but yet maybe something that people don't want to see.
April 2024. Right before Caitlin Clark enters the WNBA, A'ja Wilson sits down with the Associated Press. And she says something that's about to change everything. Quote, I think it's a huge thing. I think a lot of people say it's not about black and white, but to me it is. Because you can be top-notch at what you are as a black woman. But yet maybe something that people don't want to see. She continues, it doesn't matter how hard I work. It doesn't matter what we do as black women, we're still gonna be swept under the rug. That interview drops. Nike's biggest women's basketball star just made marketability about race. And then Caitlin Clark signs with Nike weeks later.
Well, I believe that Nike heard those words combined with the actions of a lot of the athletes in the WNBA. Remember, Indiana Fever fans, Caitlin Clark fans, were a bunch of racists. And I think Nike threw the brakes on. I think they threw the brakes on, this is my opinion, I've always believed this, they threw the brakes on marketing Caitlin Clark.
Here's what happened next. Nothing. Absolute crickets from Nike on Caitlin Clark marketing. Meanwhile, every single basketball game, every NFL broadcast, you're seeing A'ja Wilson commercials on repeat. That You Want a Chant campaign directed by someone connected to the Obamas, full marketing blitz for a player whose games weren't drawing viewers. While the rookie who just brought 3 million people to women's basketball gets radio silence from her own sponsor, we all sat there going, are they really blowing the greatest marketing opportunity since Michael Jordan and Nike's asleep at the wheel?
And much to the chagrin of all of us trying to watch Caitlin Clark play for the Indiana Fever, we had to sit through a series of those awful commercials. Whoa. But we survived somehow. We survived. All the while going, where the hell is Caitlin Clark's marketing at? And not till what? About 6 weeks ago? We finally got a commercial, and it was a damn good one, with Caitlin Clark.
But they weren't asleep. They were making a calculated decision. Because remember what was happening in the league at that exact moment. Indiana Fever fans were being labeled racists. Caitlin Clark fans were being called the problem. Players were openly hostile about the attention she was receiving. Chennedy Carter's cheap shot. Dejanai Carrington's eye poke. Angel Reese claiming she started it all, not Caitlin. The narrative became, if you support Caitlin Clark, you're part of the problem. Nike heard that loud and clear, and they made a choice.
But we finally got something out of Nike. Just 18 months later. And now you've got to wonder, did Nike sideline far and away what would have been their most marketable athlete in women's sports? Let's keep it real, right?
Think about Nike's recent history. This is the company that went all in on Colin Kaepernick, made him the face of a campaign that divided the country. Nike doesn't shy away from controversy when it aligns with their agenda, but suddenly, with their most marketable athlete in decades, they go completely silent for a year and a half. That's not accidental. That's not incompetence. That's a deliberate strategy driven by DEI priorities that put ideology ahead of business. And now the federal government is investigating whether that ideology crossed the line into illegal discrimination.
The Equal Opportunity Commission, Employment Commission, a federal agency that investigates and enforces laws prohibiting workplace discrimination, says it issued a subpoena seeking to compel Nike to turn over information dating back as far as 2018. It sought details about how Nike tracked and used employee race and ethnicity data, the decision-making process behind how it set executive pay.
The U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission announced Wednesday they filed an enforcement action against Nike. The allegations: systemic race discrimination against white workers, passing them over for promotions, choosing them for layoffs based on race, failing to select them for leadership development programs. The EEOC issued a subpoena seeking information dating back to 2018. They want details about how Nike tracked and used employee race and ethnicity data, the decision-making process behind executive pay, and here's the key part: information about 16 programs that allegedly provided race-restricted mentoring, leadership, and career development opportunities. Race-restricted. Read that again.
Surprising and unusual escalation. We had extensive good faith participation in the EEOC inquiry into our personnel practices, programs, and decisions, and had ongoing efforts to provide information and engage constructively with the agency. We have shared thousands of pages of information, detailed written responses to the EEOC's inquiry, and are in the process of providing additional information.
Nike's response: this feels like a surprising and unusual escalation. They claim they've had extensive, good faith participation in the inquiry, shared thousands of pages of information, but here's what matters. The EEOC doesn't file enforcement actions lightly. They investigated. Nike didn't provide everything they requested, so the federal government went to court to compel them. That's not a fishing expedition. That's an agency that found enough evidence to pursue this aggressively, and it raises an obvious question. If Nike was making employment decisions based on race internally, were they making marketing decisions based on race externally?
Michael Jeffrey Jordan? And all the while, every damn basketball game, even NFL games, you're like, why am I looking at an A'ja Wilson commercial right now? Got a 4-time MVP, Rhodes. Yeah, don't draw flies to shit. I mean, let's be honest. Let's keep it real here. That's what we do on this channel. Not drawing nothing. Not drawing a view to nothing.
Let's walk through the timeline. Nike signs Caitlin Clark. Massive deal. Everyone expects a huge marketing push. Instead, they saturate broadcasts with A'ja Wilson commercials that nobody asked for. Caitlin's rookie season happens. Record ratings, sold-out arenas, mainstream media coverage. Nike stays quiet. 6 weeks ago, 18 months after signing her, they finally release one commercial. One for an athlete who brought more attention to women's basketball than anyone in history. That's not a marketing strategy. That's damage control after realizing they made a catastrophic business mistake by prioritizing optics over opportunity.
I'm just pointing that out. Oh, but Rose, did you have to make a political... Look, I mean, it is what it is. It's an agenda-driven league. And I'm telling you, between the words that she come out and said, combined with the fact that all of a sudden you had a bunch of pissed-off WNBA players because they wasn't getting the love that Caitlin Clark was getting.
Now connect this to the broader picture. The Trump administration comes in and starts dismantling DEI initiatives across federal agencies. Companies start getting investigated for discrimination that was previously considered acceptable under the DEI framework. Nike's practices, which might have been overlooked in a different political climate, are now under federal scrutiny. And the timing reveals something important. These practices weren't new. They've been happening since at least 2018, according to the EEOC subpoena. This was Nike's operating philosophy for years. DEI wasn't just a program, it was how they made decisions about people and products. Here's what makes this significant. Nike had the opportunity to build Caitlin Clark into a global icon. A once-in-a-generation athlete with mainstream crossover appeal, genuine charisma, and a fan base that was desperate for content. They could have created a marketing campaign that transcended women's basketball and made her a household name on par with any athlete in any sport. The business case was obvious. The return on investment would have been astronomical, but they didn't do it. And the question is, why? Was it incompetence? Were they genuinely unaware of what they had? Or was it something else? Because when you look at who they were marketing instead, and you remember A'ja Wilson's comments about race and marketability, and you consider the federal investigation into race-based decision-making at Nike, a pattern emerges that's hard to ignore. A'ja Wilson told the Associated Press that black women get swept under the rug regardless of their accomplishments. Nike heard that, then Caitlin Clark arrived and immediately became the most marketable player in the league. Not because of some inherent advantage, because she was must-watch television. Because she filled arenas. Because casual sports fans who'd never watched women's basketball were suddenly tuning in. That's not privilege. That's earned attention through extraordinary performance. But Nike made a choice. Instead of capitalizing on the athlete who was actually moving the needle, they doubled down on marketing the athlete who fit their preferred narrative. They ran A'ja Wilson commercials during Caitlin Clark games. Think about that business decision. Your audience is tuning in to watch one specific player, and you're using that captive audience to promote a different player from a rival team. That's not marketing. That's messaging. And the message was clear. We're not going to let market demand dictate our priority. We're going to use our platform to push the narrative we want, regardless of what consumers are telling us they want to see. That's ideological decision-making masquerading as business strategy. And according to the EEOC, that same ideological framework was being applied to employment decisions, promotions, and career development opportunities inside the company. The federal investigation alleges that Nike created race-restricted programs, not diversity programs that encouraged applications from underrepresented groups. Race-restricted, meaning certain opportunities were available to some employees and not others based explicitly on race. If that's proven, it's not just unethical, it's illegal. And it suggests that Nike's commitment to DEI went beyond good faith efforts to address historical inequities and crossed into active discrimination. Now apply that framework to the Caitlin Clark situation. If Nike was willing to restrict employment opportunities based on race internally, is it really a stretch to think they might restrict marketing opportunities based on race externally? Especially when their biggest basketball star had just gone on record saying that marketability is about race, and that black women get overlooked regardless of merit. Nike found themselves in an impossible position of their own making. They had an athlete who was objectively their most valuable marketing asset. But promoting her aggressively would have contradicted the narrative that A'ja Wilson had just articulated. It would have proven that merit and market demand actually do determine marketability, not race. So they gave Caitlin the contract to keep her away from Adidas or Under Armour, but they didn't give her the marketing push that contract should have included. And for 18 months, we all watched this play out in real time. Caitlin Clark breaking viewership records, while Nike ran commercials for players whose games nobody was watching. It was surreal. It was bad business. And now we're learning it might have been part of a broader pattern of race-based decision-making that the federal government considers discriminating. Here's the thing about DEI programs that actually work. They expand opportunity without restricting it. They identify talented people who might have been overlooked and give them a platform to succeed. But when DEI becomes about restricting opportunities from one group to benefit another group, it stops being about equity and starts being about discrimination. And that's what the EEOC is alleging happened at Nike. The investigation covers practices going back to that's 6 years of decision-making under scrutiny, 6 years of promotions, layoffs, leadership development programs, and executive compensation decisions that the EEOC believes were influenced by race in ways that violated federal law. And if that was happening in HR, why wouldn't it be happening in marketing? Caitlin Clark's situation might be the most visible example, but it's probably not the only one. How many other athletes got overlooked for marketing opportunities because they didn't fit Nike's preferred narrative? How many products got shelved? How many campaigns got killed because someone decided they sent the wrong message about who deserves attention and who doesn't? This is what happens when companies prioritize ideology over merit. They make bad business decisions that hurt their bottom line and potentially violate the law. Nike's stock has been struggling. Their market share in basketball has been declining, and now they're facing a federal investigation that could result in significant penalties and forced changes to their employment practices, all because they decided that social messaging was more important than giving consumers what they actually wanted. And what consumers wanted was Caitlin Clark. They wanted to see her in commercials. They wanted Nike to build a signature shoe line around. They wanted the company that made Michael Jordan a global icon to do the same thing for the woman who was bringing that same level of excitement to women's basketball. Instead, they got 18 months of silence followed by one commercial that felt like an afterthought. Scott Agnes and other reporters covered the frustration from fans who couldn't understand why Nike was fumbling this opportunity. The speculation was rampant. Was Caitlin's contract not as big as reported? Did she have limited marketing obligations? Was Nike waiting for some specific milestone? But the simplest explanation might be the correct one. Nike made a conscious decision not to market her aggressively, because doing so would have contradicted their DEI narrative and potentially upset other athletes on their roster who had made marketability about race. The federal investigation doesn't prove that's what happened, but it establishes that Nike was making race-based decisions in other areas of their business. And it makes you wonder how deep that culture went. When Aja Wilson said that black women get swept under the rug, Nike responded by sweeping their most marketable athlete under the rug. That's not irony, that's ideology in action. So where does this leave Caitlin Clark? She's locked into a Nike contract. She's finally getting some marketing support, but it's too little too late. The momentum from her rookie season is gone. The cultural moment has passed. Nike had 12 months to strike while the iron was hot, and they let it cool. Now they're trying to reheat it with a single commercial and hoping people forget that they completely botched the rollout. And where does it leave Nike? Facing a federal investigation that could expose years of discriminatory practice, dealing with declining market share in their core basketball business, watching their biggest competitor, Adidas, gain ground, and trying to explain to shareholders why they didn't capitalize on the most obvious marketing opportunity in women's sports history. The EEOC investigation will take time. Discovery will be extensive. If it goes to trial, we'll learn exactly how Nike made decisions about promotions, layoffs, and career development. We'll see internal communications about DEI programs and whether they cross the line from expanding opportunity to restricting it. And we might finally get answers about why Caitlin Clark's marketing got sidelined while Aja Wilson's got amplified. But regardless of what the investigation reveals, the damage is done. Nike showed us who they are. They're a company that prioritizes social messaging over business fundamental, that makes decisions based on ideology rather than market demand, that's willing to sacrifice enormous financial opportunities to maintain a narrative, and that's not sustainable in a competitive marketplace. So the question becomes, was it worth it? Was protecting Aja Wilson's feelings about marketability worth losing 18 months of Caitlin Clark's prime marketing window? Was maintaining DEI orthodoxy worth facing a federal investigation for discrimination? Was sending a social message worth billions in lost market value? Nike made their choice. Now they're living with the consequences. And Caitlin Clark is left wondering what could have been if she'd signed with a company that actually wanted to market her. What do you think? Did Nike deliberately sideline Caitlin Clark to avoid contradicting their DEI narrative? Or is this just a massive coincidence? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more coverage of how ideology is affecting sports business decisions, hit subscribe, because this story is far from over.